jaws are having their throats torn out. Few people would come into a place like this by accident. These were most likely grave robbers here to plunder the Kofun tomb. Who was it that did this to them? All of a sudden, the sound of a bizarre cry assaulted Nakajima's ears. Yaahglulu. It sounded like the voice was coming from far away, but the unusual reverberations produced from the walls of the burial pathway made it difficult to judge the distance of sounds. Nakajima cast a sidelong glance at the butchered corpses of the mummies. If the grave guardian that mercilessly slaughtered these would-be grave robbers was still patrolling this path to the burial chamber now. As Nakajima shuddered, that very same guardian leapt out in front of his eyes from the shadow of a great rock. Yomatsu Shikome, Nakajima cried. The fierce image of the monster woman from his vision was burned into Nakajima's memory. But the Yomatsu Shikome standing before him was far more grotesque in real life than he had imagined. She was almost exactly twice his height. Her purple-flecked squat legs glistened white with slime, and bloated lower stomach of the torso held up by them stuck out like that of a pregnant woman. The robe she wore seemed almost comical, it was so small, and it did not even extend down far enough to cover her breasts, which drooped all the way down to her navel. Her webbed hands shuddered, thick with blubber. Her face was almost exactly that of a green frog, and as she exhaled, two gill-like slits on the side of her throat expanded, exposing the pink fleshy walls within. Her long, shimmering black hair made her look only all the more disgusting. Yomatsu Shikome took a step forward. As Nakajima met her gaze, he carefully laid Yumiko down, wiped the cold sweat off his hands onto his slacks, and picked up his handheld computer. Kerberos, please come here. Before the white haze that came out of the liquid crystal display could even take on the shape of a rough outline, it vanished with a weak bark. Apparently the crimson paint of this pathway really did seal off the power of the demon beast. Yomatsu Shikome thrust her webbed hands down at the petrified Nakajima's shoulders. Leaping to the side at the last minute, Nakajima slipped and fell on the ground. He desperately tried to get up, but the large hands had already grabbed onto him. Yomatsu Shikome's long tongue licked the area around her huge mouth, and her rancid breath assaulted Nakajima's senses. Izanami, are you going to abandon me after I've come all this way? Nakajima instinctively cried out. For some reason, the instant that the monster woman heard Nakajima's cry, she started acting strangely, her mouth agape. She looked at Nakajima with a blank expression, all hostility gone completely. Her eyes looked around the area, then fixated on the body of Yumiko, laying on the side of the path. An expression of awe came over her face. Izanami. Her throat jiggling, Yomatsu Shikome spoke the name reverently. Putting Nakajima back on the ground, the monster woman clumsily waddled over to Yumiko, and carefully picked her up as if handling a fragile broken object. Hey, wait, what are you going to do with Yumiko? Taking a disapproving glance at Nakajima, Yomatsu Shikome cocked her head as if to signal him to follow her, and proceeded down the burial pathway, holding Yumiko. Chapter 2. At that time, Loki swiftly entered Shirasagi Mound, and was standing before the passageway that Nakajima had passed through earlier. Just you wait, Nakajima. Soon, I will defile your precious woman before your very eyes before devouring you whole. With a twisted smile on his face, Loki transformed himself into an amorphous blob and oozed into the tunnel. Loki descended the passageway that took Nakajima hours to traverse in mere minutes. Soon the blob of flesh made a squishing sound as it dropped to the stone floor of the plaza before the burial pathway. At that instant, its outer membrane hissed and gave off smoke as it started to melt. Damn you! Loki quickly transformed back into his bronze body, and kneeling on the ground, let loose a terrible howl. Most likely, he could not stand the chemical reaction that took place when his protoplasmic body came into contact with the mercuric sulfide. Even now, the one gelatinous place of his body between his eyes throbbed and pulsated. Gritting his teeth and standing, Loki stared solemnly at the crimson burial road. Chapter 3. Meanwhile, Nakajima had reached the end of the burial pathway, led by Yomatsu Shikome. Before him stood a burial chamber. It had to be the spot where Izanami lay. I've finally made it here. The chamber itself had no door, but a silvery, fluorescent relief in the floor by the entrance gave off an aura as if guarding the chamber within. It resembled a Solomon hexagram quite a bit. Yomatsu Shikome with her chin as if to urge him inside. As Nakajima started to enter, she gently placed Yumiko down so that he could carry her on his back. "Aren't you coming in?" As Nakajima spoke, the monster woman looked as if struck by fear and awe and shook her head. And all of a sudden, Yomatsu Shikome thrust her long arm down her throat, all the way down to her elbow. Her green neck expanded, and she fiercely vomited. An awful stench wafted up from the bile, and Nakajima reflexively turned away. Yomatsu Shikome, on the other hand, retrieved two glowing blue spheres from amongst the vomit and presented them to Nakajima. While he didn't particularly want to take them, he didn't want to ignore the beastly woman's kindness, and grimaced as he accepted the gift. The phlegm-covered spheres felt very light, and fit perfectly into his hands. "What are these?" In response to Nakajima's question, the giant woman made a motion of striking her slimy hands together. "Am I supposed to knock these together?" Yomatsu Shikome nodded over and over again, narrowed her eyes, and opened her mouth halfway. Was that just a smile? Nakajima started to feel a fondness for the monster. Right at that moment, the sound of someone's cry from the far end of the burial pathway echoed throughout the area. Yomatsu Shikome shuddered with surprise. Looking behind several times regretfully, she started back along the path. Stooping over so that Yumiko would not slide off his back, Nakajima wiped off the spheres given to him by the monster woman on his slacks, and knocked them together forcefully. Bright orange fireworks flew in all directions, but aside from that, nothing seemed to happen. Are these supposed to be used in some sort of ceremony or something? Unable to find an answer, Nakajima dropped the two spheres into his pocket and straddled over the relief under Yumiko's weight. The burial chamber itself smelled slightly of flowers. It was about 4 meters long in every direction. Dozens of pots as high as Nakajima's waist were lined up all around the room. Looking inside them, he could see oil gathered in the bottom. It appeared to be what was giving off the smell of flowers. Most likely, it was a pomade offered to Izanami. Right in front of him stood a white granite dais. On top of it lay ashes in the form of a cross, no, that of a person lying on their back. Chapter 4. At that moment, Yomatsu Shikome hurried her pace, sensing a new presence after having led Nakajima to the burial chamber. As she rarely displayed any sort of emotion outwardly, it was unclear whether or not she was thinking, "There sure are a lot of intruders today." But in the thousands of years during which she had protected the sanctity of the Kofun tomb, there was never a time before when it had seen 2 visitors on the same day. Presently she came upon Loki running down the burial corridor, and she stretched her slimy arms out as far as they could go to block his passage. "Rauiere." Yomatsu Shikome tried to tell him something in a foreign tongue. She could sense that this intruder possessed a power much different and far greater than the human tomb robbers that had foolishly wandered in before. If possible, she wanted to repel him without having to fight. Caught off guard, Loki stood still and narrowed his jet-black eyes, as if sizing up the power of this new arrival. Then, he started to walk forward calmly, an arrogant smirk on his face. Traveling so fast it was not even visible, Loki's fist slammed into Yomatsu Shikome's still extended shoulder. Without even a chance to cry out, the monster woman was slammed against the rock wall, her flailing purple-flecked legs kicking at the cold stone floor. "Did you really think you would be able to stop me?" Loki mocked Yomatsu Shikome as she finally managed to stand back up. Having fully regained her senses, Yomatsu Shikome charged at Loki, bellowing threats at him. But Loki did not even attempt to dodge, and merely grabbed the arm of the fearsomely charging monster woman, and twisted it hard. In an instant, Yomatsu Shikome's arm was torn off below the elbow, and fresh blood gushed out of the wound. Realizing that she couldn't stand a chance of defeating him by sheer strength, the monster woman made a suicidal charge at Loki, attempting to pin him with her overwhelming weight, and surprised, he fell over as she crashed into him. But even though her attack succeeded, Yomatsu Shikome's fangs could not penetrate his bronze skin as she attempted to tear out his throat, merely making harmless scraping sounds against his neck. As Loki plunged his sharp talons into Yomatsu Shikome's chest and tore out her heart, he nonchalantly threw aside the monster woman as she let out a horrible death cry, proceeding down the path as if nothing had happened. "Izanami, Izanami!" Yomatsu Shikome's sorrowful cries soon became key. Better than the gentle breeze flowing through the corridor. Chapter 5. Though he had made it all the way to Izanami's burial chamber, Nakajima had no idea how to make contact with her, so was at a loss for what to do. A cold chill ran down his spine, and as he looked around, not knowing what just happened, he found himself staring at Loki, who was looking in through the entrance to the chamber. Unable to make a sound, Nakajima just stood still, rooted to the spot. Well, it's nice to see you're doing well. Loki calmly folded his arms as he spoke intimidatingly. Shielding Yumiko's body behind him, Nakajima carefully and cautiously watched Loki to see what he would do. If he had half a mind to, he could easily demolish him in his current defenseless state. So why wasn't he trying to come inside the burial chamber? Before long, Nakajima's eyes were drawn to the silver relief carved into the floor by the entrance of the chamber. The hexagram was preventing Loki from entering. That was the only possible explanation. As if maybe he had realized what Nakajima had been thinking, Loki started talking to him in a coaxing tone. Nakajima, there is no reason to fear me. If you join forces with me again, you can rule the human world. Ha, you think that will work after you tried to kill me? To start with, I didn't run away from you in the first place. I've got to bring Yumiko back to life, whatever it takes. Now go away and don't bother me. You want to revive the woman? Then why don't you ask me to? It would be only too simple for me to teach you the art of soul returning. The art of soul returning was a spell to revive the dead. However, even if the spell could completely restore a person's body, it could not restore their soul as well. The art of soul returning. Are you seriously asking me to replace Yumiko's pure soul with that of a demon? Pure, you say? Snickering, Loki opened his jet-black eyes wide as if to coerce Nakajima. That seems like an unlikely choice of words for a human who has willfully joined forces with demons. Look at my eyes. Loki's voice was full of power that was difficult to defy. Reflexively looking into the demon's eyes, Nakajima gulped at the horrific vision that he saw deep within them. Countless people with heads wrenched off and severed by demon tentacles. Eyes rotting and oozing out of their sockets. Flowing rivers of fresh blood. Kondo Hiroyuki, Takamizawa Kyoko, and a host of women he had never seen before glared at Nakajima, hatred and curses in their eyes. He could almost hear their anguished cries. Take a good look, Nakajima. This is all what you wanted. It was none other than you that called me here to the Asiya world. Loki's hearty laughter ripped deep into Nakajima's soul. But the faint smell of flowers kept Nakajima from breaking down completely. The very least I can do now is bring Yumiko back to life. Without using the art of soul returning, what can a mere human do to revive the dead? You're very right that I can't do anything myself. But the spirit of Izanami, resting in this burial chamber, will grant my wish. Such foolishness. Loki grinned and laughed, but his lips were twisted somewhat unnaturally. Even with the protection of his thick bronze skin, the crimson paint was starting to consume the demon's body little by little. Very well then, if that corpse is so important to you, then knock yourself out. At some point, Loki's laugh had turned into a roar of anger. His pitch-black eyes, full of hatred, turned to Yumiko's corpse. Suddenly white vapor started rising out of her body, and a horrible rotting smell assaulted Nakajima's nostrils. Stop it! Trying to shield her from Loki's gaze, Nakajima ran over to Yumiko. But as he put his hand to the nape of her neck, it came back covered in rotted skin and wet with meaty juices. Unable to control himself, Nakajima vomited into his hand, blackened and covered by the fleshy liquids. Right as Yumiko's neck seemed to droop into an unnatural position, her eyeballs rolled out of her head and onto the floor, trailing blood behind them. Where her nose once was nothing but a hole in with a few scraps of flesh left in it. Her hair separated from her rotting scalp and fell to the floor. Yumiko's white teeth became visible where her lips rotted away and tore off. Staring dumbfoundedly at her, Nakajima became even more terrified. Yumiko's hand started to move on its own, slowly. His whole body drenched in cold sweat, Nakajima stepped back away from her. Why are you doing this to me? Please let me die. Yumiko finally stood up on her own. Please, kill me. Speaking indistinctively, Yumiko approached Nakajima. Each step she took, a pot shattered, and the pomade inside flowed out onto the floor. Her fingers, merely bone now that their flesh had rotted off, grasped at the air, trying to grab onto Nakajima's hand. Having completely lost all capacity for reason, Nakajima shook his hand wildly as if to keep Yumiko away, and retreated further into the burial chamber. Slowly and steadily, as if being pulled in on an invisible line, she approached closer and closer to him. No matter how hideous she got, Nakajima could never harm Yumiko, and as he was pressed further and further back into the burial chamber, he placed his hand down onto the granite dais, picked up a handful of ash, and threw it at Yumiko. Ancient magicians had used ash as a ward against evil spirits, and perhaps memories of this had lodged somewhere deep in Nakajima's subconscious. As the ash landed on the pomade spilling from the broken pots, it flew back up into the air despite there being no hint of a breeze, and started assembling into an image, highlighted like a hologram. The instant Yumiko's extended hand was about to grab onto Nakajima's throat, her body was enveloped in a flash of crimson. The spell controlling her cadaver like a puppet was broken. The power flooded out of Yumiko's corpse, and it crumpled to the ground. I'm glad you made it, Nakajima. Nakajima returned to his senses as the gentle voice called to him. Her eyes full of kindness, a woman that looked exactly like Yumiko was gazing at him. No, perhaps it was only her silhouette that matched Yumiko's. Her milky white skin, concealing the divinity within, shone with a slight phosphorescent glow, and her chocolate brown eyes glimmered with a light suggesting a wisdom clearly different than that of a human. Izanami. Nakajima found himself kneeling all of a sudden. Nodding, the goddess turned toward Loki. Demon, return to your world. Her voice was cold and harsh. Loki smiled sarcastically, but his expression could not hide his uneasiness. You appear to be one of the Kunitsukami of Yamato. Why do you go to such lengths to support these humans? Because this girl is my reincarnation. Your reincarnation? Loki spread his arms in an exaggerated motion. Fine, then you can have the girl. In exchange, I will take the boy. It surely will benefit him to join forces with me as well. I still wish to avoid any unnecessary confrontation. Holding his breath, Nakajima watched the two talk, and a shiver ran down his spine. You're just afraid that some other demon will get a hold of Nakajima and his knowledge. Saying so, Izanami strained her eyes and glared at Loki's chest. Red light exploded on his breast, and Loki stumbled back from the blow. The spontaneous combustion power she was using was many times more powerful than when she had possessed Yumiko. So that's your answer, eh? In anger, Loki's hair stood on end, and he glared at Izanami from the entrance of the burial chamber. But no matter what he did, he could not cross that silver relief. On the other hand, Izanami's power was not dealing any serious damage to him either. But as the two glared at each other, the goddess' expression clouded. Right at that moment, Nakajima noticed the form of a white silhouette in Loki's dark eyes. I've seen that before. Reflected in Loki's eyes was not the Izanami standing before him, but her as a hideous cadaver, chasing after the man she loved. Take a good look, Izanami. Loki's low voice wavered the goddess' resolve. My eyes reflect whatever your deepest fears are like a mirror. The more you look at them, the more your own fears will make you tremble. I must say that you're quit. Hideous, I have trouble believing this is your true form. As if to add fuel to the fire Loki was kindling, the image of a single person appeared, that of the young Izanagi, running in terror from the hideous Izanami chasing him. Your mate abandoned you because of your ugliness. How pathetic. Ha, ha, ha. You dirty. Forgetting herself in the humiliation, Izanami started walking towards Loki, as if being pulled in. No, Izanami, if you leave the burial chamber, you'll be at Loki's mercy. At Nakajima's words, Izanami painfully stopped in her tracks, and the dark shadow of someone darted behind her. Loki's left hand was moving in a rhythmical motion. By the time Izanami realized it was a spell to control the dead, it was already too late. Yumiko's corpse had stood up and shoved Izanami from behind, and in her surprise, the goddess stumbled outside of the burial chamber. Making sure to stay out of her deadly line of sight, Loki kicked out Izanami's legs out from under her, and twisted her arm behind her back, pinning her to the ground. That was all too easy. It was foolish for a mere woman like you to try to resist me. The parts of Loki's body that were making contact with Izanami started to change from bronze into pink protoplasm. Kunitsukami of Yamato, I will impregnate you with the child of a demon. With a stench seemingly capable of polluting the purest of substances, the repulsive blob started to spread over Izanami's body. Izanami looked at Nakajima, as if asking for help. But what could the unarmed Nakajima do against a demon that was capable of effortlessly restraining even a goddess? In a last-ditch effort, Nakajima entered a command into his handheld computer. Though trying to summon the electronic beast failed in the Crimson Burial Pathway, the powerful aura in the burial chamber might act as a catalyst to bring its power back. As if in answer to Nakajima's prayers, Kerberos appeared in the chamber and let out a roar that shook its very walls, then stood ready for any orders. Kerberos, rescue Izanami. The outcome of the battle was clear from the outset. Even if Kerberos was at peak health, Loki was on an entirely different level of power, and Nakajima already knew what the result of such a match would be. Add to that the fact that the demon beast was already hurt and tired, and it became even all the more obvious. Even so, Kerberos resolutely leapt at Loki in attack. The beast's instinct had most likely already told it that this terrible enemy's one weak point was the protoplasmic area on his forehead. Dodging Loki's swipes, Kerberos clawed at Loki's forehead with his burly front paws, leapt away, and leapt at him again, repeating the attack. Pattern not letting up. Trying to fend off these attacks while using another hand to keep Izanami down, Loki was having more trouble fighting Kerberos than might have been expected. Loki was not paying any attention to Nakajima at all. If he was able to seize this chance and hit him in the wound in his forehead, he might be able to rescue Izanami. If only he had some sort of weapon. Nakajima desperately looked around the chamber, praying to find something he could use. Right at that moment, Izanami cried out. Turning around in surprise, Nakajima saw her writhing in agony, still under Loki's restraint. But her eyes were not displaying any pain, and it almost seemed as if she was secretly trying to communicate something to him. What is it you want to say? Instinctively Nakajima started to step outside of the chamber. As if to warn him, the goddess glared at him, and cried out, "Hurry!" The fire. For an instant Loki was distracted by Izanami's words and looked in Nakajima's direction, but in that instant Kerberos seized the opportunity and slashed him in his forehead, once again drawing his attention. Fire! What do you mean by fire? In a moment of epiphany, Nakajima remembered the two spheres that Yomatsu Shikome had given him. Praying that they would do something, he knocked them together. Twice, 3 times, pale fireworks shot out, but other than that nothing happened. Is this really what Izanami wants? Nakajima's palms started sweating with worry, but the fireworks produced by the spheres knocked together in his last-ditch attempt at doing anything lit the pomade in the room. With a large roar, the flames leapt up and formed a circle in the air. In the center of the pale orange flames, the shape of a human's face formed, and flickered with purpose. Hai no Kagatsuchi. It was the god of fire, Hai no Kagatsuchi, whom Izanami gave birth to immediately before she first died. Even though he had not been taught that name by anyone, Nakajima somehow knew it. Instinctively Nakajima extended his right hand into the flames hovering into the air. Air swirling like a whirlwind, Hai no Kagatsuchi's flames painted a spiral shape in the air as they coiled around Nakajima's outstretched hand. Nakajima bit down on his lip and tried to withstand the heat. It was not like the feeling of skin being scorched by flames, but instead a pain as if the flesh and bone making contact with the flame was somehow boiling, giving off heat from inside. Presently his flame-enveloped arm gave off a great flash of light. It was so blinding that even the battling Loki and Kerberos stopped for a moment. Rubbing his dazzled eyes, Nakajima realized that in his hand, stretched upward toward the ceiling, he was gripping a sword giving off a crimson phosphorescent glow. An overwhelming power the likes of which he had never expressed. Ariance flowed through his body. Without hesitation, Nakajima leapt out of the burial chamber. With this sword giving off an unimaginable aura in his field of vision, Loki's movements faltered for an instant. Not missing a beat, Kerberos bared his fangs and attacked, and the instant Loki tried to brush him aside with his hand, he left his face wide open. Nakajima thrust the blade forward with all his might. Reflexively, Loki let go of Izanami and tried to cover his forehead with his right hand, but Nakajima's sword clove it in two and with a feeling of heavy resistance, sunk deep into Loki's forehead. Gyaah! Loki's cry shook the very walls of the burial pathway. Holding his forehead with his left hand, sword still embedded therein, Loki staggered to his feet. From the lower protoplasmic mass of his lower body, the demon's bronze upper body underwent a rapid transformation. With an unpleasant slimy sound, his bronze skin crumbled away, and the impaled sword clattered to the ground. Loki's entire body transformed into an undefined, undulating lump. Standing dumbfounded at his own unexpected power, Nakajima watched as one section of the unstable mass of flesh in front of him started throbbing. Suddenly, as if it was a separate life form of its own, a green heart broke through the skin of the protoplasmic mass and tumbled onto the floor. It started to draw a strange figure on the floor with the stream of green blood flowing on it. As it did so, the air seemed to twist in on itself slightly, centered on the figure the heart was drawing. That is Loki, Nakajima, do not let the demon escape. Pulled back to his senses by Izanami's voice, Nakajima swiftly picked up the Hai no Kagutsuchi sword off the floor and thrust it into the heart of Loki as it tried to escape into the warped space. After an instant of silence, the heart burst like a popped balloon. The undefined mass of flesh stopped writhing. The silence was broken the next instant as Nakajima was assaulted by a rumbling roar from deep under the floor of the underground valley. Crimson stones started falling from the high ceiling blanketed in darkness. Still holding the sword, Nakajima tumbled into the burial chamber, as if crawling through the rumbling underground space. The pots shattered one after another, spilling their pomade on the floor. Out of place amongst the chaos, the gentle smell of flowers wafted throughout the room. Yumiko. As Nakajima tried to make out the glowing white form by the entrance of the burial chamber, his consciousness drifted far away. Epilogue. Thump, thump. Something was throbbing. It was a slight rhythm, but was definitely there. Nakajima had already awoken earlier. He had felt warmth, and felt as if he wanted to remain immersed in sleep for just a little longer. As if suddenly struck by a wave of sentimentality, Nakajima slowly opened his eyelids. He found that his arms were wrapped around Yumiko. A bittersweet fragrance wafted vibrantly from her body. Yumiko. Hesitantly, Nakajima spoke. She showed no response to his breath. But she had definitely returned to life. Her formerly rent mouth had returned to its lovely original shape, and her slightly opened lips shivered slightly as she breathed. Her eye sockets were now covered with well-formed eyelids, and her cheeks had a slight pink hue to them. Nakajima's impatience was enveloped by an untainted presence. Don't worry, she will awaken soon enough. Turning around, Nakajima saw Izanami standing above him. Though her hair was matted with green blood, her shining, beautiful expression, full of kindness, calmed his soul. The goddess opened her lips. I will take care of her for a while. Nakajima was perplexed by her statement. It will not be long, only until I strengthen her enough so that she can fight demons. Fight demons? But Loki's dead. The goddess approached, took Nakajima's hands and looked into his eyes. That instant, white light shone throughout the space in front of his eyes, and all color vanished from his field of vision. Look at this scene, Nakajima. Her voice full of worry, Izanami's voice hinted at the gravity of the situation. As Izanami's fingers grabbed Nakajima's hands, an image clearly formed amongst the white space. In the Jusho Haikai room that Nakajima was so familiar with, Ohara was sitting at a terminal, desperately talking. Loki, why won't you answer? Gripping the microphone as she faced the silent computer, the image of Ohara trembled. Turning the power on and off again and again, she tried to run the demon summoning program. But the host computer's magnetic tapes remained motionless. Only the fans of the air conditioner disturbed the silence of the Kai room. Ooh, Ohara stooped over and grabbed her lower belly. All the blood drained from her face. As if a sign that she was carrying the child of a demon within her, scales had started growing on the white nape of her neck. Don't kick, Ohara whispered as if to scold the new life growing inside her. As Ohara continued typing on the keyboard with a prayerful look on her face, the magnetic tapes started spinning as if mocking her on a whim. Loki, is that you? Ohara's eyes glimmered with joy. She tightly gripped the microphone. I've been worried about you, Loki. At Ohara's words, the magnetic tape slowed its spinning, as if in hesitation. As Ohara cocked her head in suspicion, a low, hoarse voice sounded from the speakers. I am Set. Are you the one that calls me? Set, I'm looking for Loki. Loki, please respond. Where are you? Ohara's hysterical voice echoed throughout the Kai room. My name is Set. You are insolent to call the name of another. As Izanami let go of Nakajima's hands, the image dispersed, and in its place a gloomy space spread out before his eyes. Sweat from his temples trickled down his neck. Set, that's the most powerful evil god from Egyptian legend. Nakajima's voice was shaking. It's not just set. Many demons have sensed the pathway you open to their world, kindling their ambition to conquer the human world. More than just a handful of demons are looking to make an alliance with you. Izanami's voice was solemn and full of gravity. Trying to push any indecision out of his mind, Nakajima closed his eyes and spoke. This is all my doing, and I have to reap the seeds that I have sown. My mission now is to find a way to close the passageway to the demon world and do so. Well spoken. Izanami's expression softened slightly. It will be difficult, but I am confident your efforts will eventually pay off. I cannot descend to the material world myself, so I cannot fight alongside you. However, I will give you Hai no Kagatsuchi instead. He is a god that will lend you great power as a sword of flame when you are in danger. Hai no Kagatsuchi's power is a force to be reckoned with even amongst the gods of Yamato, and will surely help you. While listening to Izanami, Nakajima could not help but feel anxious about the still sleeping Yumiko. Perhaps she knew what he was feeling as the goddess gently put her hand on his shoulder. I will give this girl my power. And when she has gotten strong enough to defend herself on her own, I will return her to you. You'll wait that long, right? Not waiting for an answer to her question, Izanami turned away from Nakajima. Soon a messenger from Yomi will come to pick up your friend. Until then, enjoy your brief reunion. With a smile, Izanami quietly lay on top of the dais. As she vanished as if dissolving into the very air, ashes in the form of a human figure remained behind on the stone slab. Izanami, as Nakajima reflexively started toward the disappearing vision of the goddess. A familiar voice called him to a stop. Nakajima, you kept your promise to me. Turning around, he saw Yumiko looking back at him, her chocolate brown eyes filled with kindness. Delicate and pure, she leapt into Nakajima's waiting arms. The text has been copied from http://ddstranslation.blogspot.com/. This release is by myself, translation by Masakato Seiden 1015, and is unrelated to Masakato. This release is not for sale, rent or eBay.